Hello everyone, welcome to the third lecture of the NPTEL course on simulation of modern power systems. In today's discussion, we'll start with our first main module, which is power flow analysis. And we'll start our module of power flow analysis with understanding of how do we evaluate the bus admittance matrix. So first of all, why is this bus admittance matrix important and why do we need to understand its evaluation, which in a way would form the background or backbone for the overall power flow analysis. The previous two lectures, we have gone through the evolution of power systems and more importantly understood the basics of usual circuit analysis, which provides a set of voltages and currents across of a node or a branch, and from that voltage and current we can find the remaining other circuit parameters such as power consumption, losses, provided the circuit has sources which are specified in terms of voltages and currents. And in the previous lecture on circuit analysis, we have also understood that typically our sources in the given power network are not specified in terms of just voltage or current. They are usually specified in terms of power, and a bit of why that power rating comes in, I'll briefly explain in today's discussion, and more of it would be discussed in a later part of this course. But given that our sources are in terms of powers, the usual circuit analysis principle cannot be straightforwardly applied to a given power network, where we again have to find the bus voltages, the line currents, and hence we need to understand a nonlinear, we end up with a nonlinear formulation, essentially because of the reason that power is product of voltage and current, and if power is known to us in terms of a source, then essentially both voltage and current, which form our variables, they together form a nonlinear quadratic product, and hence the eventual circuit analysis equations, they turn out to be nonlinear equations, which essentially in a way are called as power flow equations, and we have to do something different than the basic circuit analysis understanding. And that's where the foundation of power flow comes in. We have also talked about the basis or assumptions involved in power flow. Typically, our understanding of power flow would begin with a extra or a very high voltage transmission system, which usually are balanced systems, and hence they can be represented in a per phase one line diagram on a per unit basis. Why these networks can be assumed to be balanced? Because that's how our system typically tends to operate. At lower voltages, the system unbalances. By unbalance, I mean the respective phase quantities, three-phase power, individual phase power, phase voltage, phase current. They may be different at low voltages, but when things are seen at the aggregated level on the high voltage side, things tend to match up each other. That means overall phase A, phase B, and phase C, their powers would be equal to each other. Their voltage magnitudes would be equal to each other with a phase angle of 120 degree apart from them, and so would be case for the currents. And power flow being a steady state tool, steady state analysis, so we also assume that there are no disturbances or changes or variations happening in the system at the moment where power flow is being done to find the voltages. Generators or sources, they would be specified in terms of power, to be precise, real power, and a terminal voltage. Transmission lines are again transposed and balanced and are usually represented in terms of nominal pi model on a per unit basis with series half-line impedance and the half-line charging admittances. Line conductances are difficult to model, they are difficult to judge or predict as the weather variation happens. In fact, one of the events that we all know as electrical engineers, known as corona loss, it is essentially, or it can be essentially modeled through line conductances. But since corona loss itself is an uncertain event, and even if it happens for a very short duration. So proper modeling of lines and conductance is not an easy task, and hence often for steady state analysis their presence is neglected. Our transmission network also has different types of transformers. Step-up transformer usually at the generating stations, whereas step-down transformer at the distribution or the subtransmission end, where the loads can consume power generated from the generating stations. And for these transformers, if they are at their nominal position, that the tap value is at a nominal position in per unit basis, it would mean that the impedance of the transformer seen from the high voltage side or on the low voltage side. By impedance, I specifically refer the effective winding resistance plus the effective leakage reactance offered by this transformer. On per unit basis, as long as the transformer tap is at the nominal position, which is usually the rated tap position, the impedance or the admittance seen on either side of HV and LV side, it would remain the same, and hence it would very well easily behave as a typical transmission line which can be modeled as a nominal pi model. And hence nothing exclusive needs to be done for transformers which operate at their nominal position. But that cannot be the case throughout the system operation. As the system variations come in, the load change, network topology change, or any variation that happens as per the operation of the system, transformers, they have to also change their tap value in order to provide voltage support, have regulation of power flow, both in terms of real and reactive power flow in a given transmission network. So the tap position tends to have variation as per the desired system operation, which again involves solving an exclusive or optimization problem. And from there we get this off-nominal tap position. Now, as long as we get this off-nominal tap position, assuming that the same per unit basis is still applicable, because when we model our system on per unit diagram or per unit basis, we don't often change our reference power or reference voltages. They remain the same as per the typical rating of the system. And that's where the admittance or impedance offered by the transformer, it no more remains the same as was the case for nominal position, and hence a special consideration is required. More details about this special consideration we will be covering up in the next lecture. But before we go into all other details, let's start focusing on how do we represent our typical electrical loads. So loads, as we all are aware of, being electrical engineers, that our loads, by electrical loads we mean any entity which is consuming real and or reactive power. Typically, real power is represented by the symbol P in power networks, whereas reactive power is often denoted by the notation Q. And if we have to write mathematical expressions to represent these loads under their different operating conditions, there can be different types of loads. For example, one of the very basic common type of load which we at the outset can understand is, assume that we have a load whose power consumption, be it P and or Q, it doesn't change at all no matter what is the rated voltage across that load or whatever is the rated current or the current which is being consumed by the load. No matter what the voltage condition or current condition is, this load will always consume the same power irrespective of the operating condition, and typically PD naught, QD naught, they represent the respective loads at the given rated condition or base condition. As again electrical engineers, you can also think of, do we have actually such loads which can be represented by constant power load? It's an interesting question, please think about it. To the best of my experience and understanding, we rarely have any such load which maintains its constant power consumption. And hence, this is one of the most idealistic conditions of representing a load entity in terms of real and reactive power. What is more practical than from this idealistic condition is, there are loads or can be loads where they tend to maintain their constant power, they tend to maintain their power factor. So why is this a little more practical situation? Heavy industry loads, where there are different individual loads, when they have to project their power consumption at the grid level or at the aggregated level, the overall system or the industrial load, having so many interior loads among themselves like pumping, lathing, soldering and so on, production systems, they tend to have these reactive power resources where, to avoid penalty from the grid side, the overall industrial load as an aggregated load can form an example of a constant power factor load. Why do we call or represent the constant power factor load as of this form? The answer to that lies in the fact that our real power is essentially nothing but product of apparent power multiplied by cos of theta, where cos of theta is nothing but the power factor itself. And similarly, Q reactive power is nothing but S times sine of theta, where the theta remains the same. We also call theta as to be the power factor angle or the load impedance angle. So, if we have to maintain constant power factor, which means cos of theta has to remain constant, which means that the value of theta should not change, it should remain constant. Alternatively, we can also write Q by P as tan of theta, apparent power SS gets cancelled, and if cos theta has to remain constant, theta has to remain constant, that means tan theta will also remain constant. So, under a different operating condition, if the respective P and Q value change while maintaining this tan theta value to be the same, we essentially get that, let us say our base values are Q naught and P naught, because we have to maintain this ratio. This should also be equal to Q by P at some other loading value. If we rewrite this term in this form, we get this expression here. That is how the constant power factor load model can be considered. Although the question is pretty evident here, is that why do we call it as the constant power factor load? We can also say it to be the constant tan theta load. Yes, it is just a way of terminological representation while trying to have minimum representation in terms of P and Q. If we have to solely represent constant power factor load, then probably we will also have to think of this apparent power S, which needs to be modeled accordingly. Moving on to a little more practical loads, we can also have constant current loads, I would say constant current magnitude loads, because we are talking about AC quantities. So, AC quantities tend to have their own magnitudes and phase angles in phasor notation. So, if we have constant current magnitude load, which often is the case for polytronic loads, the low consumption charging devices, then we all understand that in the previous few slides I mentioned, power is, or power by voltage is nothing but current. So, if I have to maintain the current magnitude to be constant, I have to maintain the ratio of power by voltage. So, respectively, if I represent P as real power, Q as reactive power, and V naught is the rated base condition voltage, then we, from this relationship, we also get our constant current magnitude load. Coincidentally, we can also have constant admittance load or impedance load, where usually these are referring to the resistive or heating type loads. The well known incandescent bulbs or lamps, they can be closely sort of represented or modeled as this constant impedance or admittance load. And we all understand that admittance, or let us say impedance, which is usually defined as Z or denoted by the term in the notation Z, it is nothing but voltage magnitude square by power, which is also equal to 1 by Y, where Y is the usual notation for admittance. So, from there, if we have to maintain the value of Z or Y to be the constant, there you can also get these relative expressions for real and reactive power. Now, the question here is, okay, there are few loads which can be represented as these individual entities, but in general sense, can all loads be modeled by using one of these respective indications like constant power factor, constant current, or constant impedance load? Possibly no. And that is where comes the most common load model, composite load model. We also call it as ZIP load, Z referring to the impedance, I referring to current, and P referring to power. So constant impedance, admittance, constant current, constant power loads, they have all been together merged into this composite load model combination, where for a given load, certain portion of the load behaves as a constant power load, certain portion of the load behaves as a constant current load, constant current magnitude load, and certain portion behaves as a constant impedance or admittance load. And since it is pertaining to these proportions or fractions, they are pertaining to the single individual load, their overall addition or sum should always be equal to 1. And there is also another inherent condition involved with them, that alpha p, alpha I, alpha z, they have to be positive numbers. They cannot be less than 0. Less than 0 would refer entity of a load which behaves in a reverse fashion, which doesn't make sense because its load is a physical entity or a physical quantity. Having negative alpha p would mean that certain portion of load on over and above its own itself is behaving in a way which doesn't exist. So there is no physical notion to things which don't exist, and hence this constraint also comes into action. Now, ZIP model, yes, okay, it can sort of interpret impedance, current and power to some extent, but is that sufficient enough? Researchers over the years have felt that no, just ZIP model will also not suffice. There are actually loads which are highly nonlinear in their behavior, and simply having ZIP model doesn't serve the purpose, because ZIP can only represent Z, I and P. Any other variation of power load behavior cannot be represented. And that is where comes the more generic model called as the exponential model, where NP and the ratio NP exponent here is usually a positive quantity, and this NP can take any real number greater than 0 depending on how nonlinear the load behavior can be. So in Z or in constant power model, for constant power model NP was 0, for constant current model NP was 1, and for constant impedance or admittance model NP is 2. Which is all present over here. With exponential load model, we can have any other NP also, and accordingly the load model can be nonlinearly represented. Having talked about the typical load models which are useful for modeling of loads, the injections or currents that these loads consume from the electrical network. Suppose I have a node or a electrical circuit node across which I have connected a motor. This motor is supposed to consume power or current from the rest of the network through which this node or other parts of the network are connected. So typically a load behavior is supposed to be that it is consuming power from the rest of the electric circuit, and if we talk about it in terms of injection, that how much is the current being injected from this node into this electrical circuit, then if the node or bus only has the load connected to it, there is no other source present to it, then you remember we were also discussing while we were discussing circuit analysis that we tend to assume currents in a certain direction, and after circuit analysis the current values may turn out to be negative or positive. If they turn out to be positive, well and fine. If they turn out to be negative, then we have to reverse the direction of current while retaining the same positive value. If we apply the same logic here, then the current injection which is being done from this node to the rest of the electrical circuit in presence of just the load which is consuming apparent power S and current I depending on what the voltage present here is, the corresponding injection will inherently be negative. Because when we say injection, it is basically injecting something from the bus to the rest of the electrical circuit. And if loads are associated as negative injections, correspondingly generators which are meant to be the sources of power, they will have positive current injections. While doing power flow analysis, the transformer ratings, reactive power devices, they are all well known, well specified, and all of these system models, be it resistances, reactances, real reactive power, generator real power, generator voltage, they are all represented on a per unit basis on a chosen system base MVA and relevant base phase voltage. I would request the students or the audience to please revise the concepts on per unit analysis. The corresponding textbooks which I have mentioned in the introduction video, they would be very helpful. The textbook on Granger and Stevenson, it talks at length about what is per unit analysis and how per unit can be sort of evaluated or derived for a given three-phase power network. So, coming to the data set that we have from for power flow and what output do we get from power flow. We know what we get from power flow. Essentially, we are trying to find the node voltages, to be precise, node voltage phasors, AC voltage phasors, so that we get to know all other remaining line currents, the power losses, power generation, and so on. But while evaluating all these output values, the power flow also requires dedicated input data, and often this portion is not well discussed or well enumerated or stated in typical textbooks. So one has to understand where this data is coming from. So when we say the load model or the load injection is assumed to be known, no, as an electrical operator, system operator, there has to be a mathematical basis or a tool from which these numbers for loads are coming in. They are just not random, arbitrary, choice-based numbers from where the load values come in. There's a dedicated exercise which goes behind, which is done, and it is all based on historical data using some load forecasting technique or tool. A lot of research has happened in load forecasting, not just load forecasting, any forecasting exercise being applied to power system has been well researched over the years, and still people are working on it. The reason behind this forecasting research or work going on is, till date there has not been any forecasting technique which can provide 100% accurate, error-free forecasts for a load, weather behavior, generation profile, and so on. So that's where the gray area of research still lies. From sources perspective or from generators perspective, the real power that I mentioned, the rating that we get, it is actually obtained from a dedicated optimization exercise. There are different forms of that optimization, but the overall idea behind that is economics. We have to operate our system at cost value so that the cost incurred while generating the power is as low as possible, because no capital investment is just for the sake of investment, it has to have returns. And different generators are of different forms. We have thermal units, hydro units, renewable resources generations, whose generation pattern is different, their response times are different, the rate of change of power which can be drawn or consumed either way in reactive power sense, they are going to be different. So there are dedicated optimization exercises which help decide how do we coordinate this different form of generators, and whatever suitable economical power that we get, we assume that to be our real power basis to be used in power flow analysis. The optimization exercises, they are called as unit commitment, economic dispatch, and optimal power flow. Unfortunately, I'll not be able to discuss much about unit commitment in this exercise, but I'll definitely touch upon economic dispatch in power flow analysis module, hopefully in the beginning of third week sometime. And we will also talk about briefly optimal power flow when we start with the second module. Same goes for the voltage ratings at the generator nodes. By generator nodes, I mean buses or nodes at which generators are connected. There could be loads also present. The voltage values for those buses are also obtained from a rigorous optimization exercise, which we call as active power loss minimization. Since voltage profile dictates or decides the flow of current, and I square R depends on what is the current flowing in a corresponding transmission line. As long as the voltage profile in the system is flat, by flat we typically refer that the voltage variation or magnitude deviation is not much. The phase angle differences between two buses through which a transmission line is connected is not much. The corresponding current flow would just be sufficient enough to have the load present at the load end consume its own respective power, and the corresponding I square R loss or I square X loss in the transmission line will be very, very low. The related optimization which goes behind getting those voltage ratings specifically at buses where voltage can be controlled. We call them as PV buses or voltage controlled buses. That exercise is done or known as active power loss minimization. Both these economics based optimization and loss minimization based optimization, they have a similar common mathematical background. And again, unfortunately, I will not be able to discuss much about this active power loss minimization in this particular course. The system parameters, network parameters, how the network is connected, it again comes from another optimization exercise which is called as state estimation. We will talk about this in detail when we talk about the module 2 on contingency analysis. But point to be noted here is that often individuals don't understand how do these parameters come in or how does this system topology come in. They all believe that okay, some operator has designed the system and that it would be present. Even if the system has been designed, data has been present, things change, things vary over time. As system ages, the corresponding resistances, inductances, capacitances, they do change, and it's not possible to sort of figure out those parameters based on a recording basis. So, corresponding measurement based analysis which provides these numeric values of parameters that goes as part of state estimation. Also, we call it as to be topology parameter estimation. All that comes from the domain of state estimation. And the utility of power flow using these voltages and currents, it essentially forms the backbone of contingency or security analysis, which is going to be our second module. So, before we delve deep into the admittance matrix evaluation, assuming that we have a generator or a voltage source whose voltage rating or specification is given, the internal source impedance is also given, meaning that it is a non-ideal independent voltage source. By KVL, we can always find the terminal voltage VAB in terms of Vs and IZS. IZS is the drop across this internal source impedance. And since it is a non-ideal voltage source, so Zs is definitely not 0. For ideal source, Zs would be 0. For non-ideal source, Zs is not 0, and only for non-ideal source, we can then rewrite this equation in this form. What does this tell us? This also tells us that this voltage source can be represented or transformed into a current source whose source current Is is Vs by Zs, which are dependent on whatever was the generator source present or voltage source present over here. The position of Zs changes. In voltage source it is in series, whereas here it is in parallel, and the output current and the terminals A and B, they still remain the same as what was present over here. So, every such non-ideal voltage or current source, their interpretations or mathematical representations can be transformed as and when required as per the convenience. So, bus admittance matrix, what is its role? What is its importance? We have seen in circuit analysis that we can have different nodes for which we try to find different voltages, after which we then try to find different branch currents. For a given AC power network which is represented in a single per unit basis, we refer to those nodes as buses. That's as simple as that. The bus in a power network is not very different. In fact, I would say it is very identical to the node in a simple electrical circuit. So, if I have a N-bus network, N-bus power network, which is shown to be this solid black color circle, and inside this black color circle there are a lot of interconnections through transmission lines, distribution lines, transformers, they are all being present, which intently has not been shown. I have just written all those portions to be part of the power system network or power network, and eventually I have to find these voltages from power flow analysis, which is the output of the power flow. So, and we also have to think that across these buses there could be load or generator connected, or both of them could be connected, because of which then there are these injections I1, I2, I3, In, so on. So, is there a way to correlate the injections from the buses into the network, the currents, in terms of voltages? Yes. The corresponding relationship in terms of bus currents as function of bus voltages is done through a matrix which is nothing but the bus admittance matrix. If I have a n bus network which pertains to a n node circuit, in fact, I would say n plus 1 node circuit where one of the bus node acts as a reference, and I have n such buses voltages to be represented in terms of n such currents, or I would say the currents are to be represented in terms of n such voltages. Inherently, for this equation to be mathematically consistent, the bus admittance matrix has to be a n cross n matrix, which would have elements starting from y11, y12, y1n all the way till yn. So, the first row in bus admittance matrix pertains to the equation of I1 in terms of V1 to Vn. Mathematically, if I have to sort of just write that, if I let us say choose Ik bus k current, then I can write this asYkj into Vj, where j is varying from 1 to n, and if I apply this for all k's ranging from 1 to n, then together this mathematical representation of currents in terms of voltages is represented in this matrix form, which is nothing but in terms of bus admittance matrix. So, now let us try to understand. So, that is the basic mathematical understanding. The question still remains unanswered is why bus admittance matrix is important. The answer to that lies in the fact that we have understood that our power network would have sources which would be in terms of power, which is inherently a product of voltage and current. And if we try to solve the nonlinear power flow equations in the same order, then probably one problem here would be that we have one equation, but then we have two unknowns or two variables. There cannot be any mathematical way of finding two unknowns from one single consistent mathematical equation. If we have one equation, then we will also have to have only one unknown which can be mathematically consistently obtained. If we represent current through the bus admittance matrix, which is a known matrix for a given network, and the remaining voltages, and replace this over here, then essentially we would have something of the form of voltage square multiplied by some y. I am not saying that y would be y bus, but then if y is known and fixed, for one equation we will only have one voltage, and then mathematically equations are can be made consistent, and then they can be solved. That is the basis or reasoning why one needs to understand bus admittance matrix, and that is the reason why it forms the basis for power flow analysis. So, now let us take a small example of how to find bus admittance matrix, and with that I will conclude this discussion of ours. We choose a 2-bus network, I would say a 2-bus network where the reference node is inherently marked as node 0. We can also call it as bus 0, and across these buses 1 and 2, there are two voltage sources connected, Vs1, Vs2, with their internal impedances Zs1, Zs2. The lines, the buses 1 and 2, they are connected through a transmission line with series impedance Z12 and 0.5 Ys12 representing the half line charging admittance. So, if we convert these voltage sources into corresponding current sources, we understand how it can be done from source transformation. And from here, if we now try to write or apply KCL at node 1 or bus 1 and bus 2, then from there we get these two equations, which can be summarized or compiled in terms of the source currents Is1, Is2 being represented in terms of V1 and V2. We all remember or note that we get an analogous Y-bus form because on right hand side we have some currents and on left hand side we have some voltages. So, does this mean that this forms the bus admittance matrix for the given 2-bus network? Definitely no. Why? Bus admittance matrix is not a correlation of source currents in terms of voltages, rather it is a correlation of bus currents or node currents, which are I1 and I2, in terms of V1 and V2. So from this expression, if we now try to get I1 and I2, we essentially get this as our mathematical form. And what do we get here or see here? The final Y bus that we are getting for this 2-bus network, the elements which are present inside or which form the component of this Y bus elements, they are essentially dependent on the line parameters only. They are not dependent on the source impedances or source admittances, and that is the uniqueness or beauty of bus admittance matrix. For a given power network where there are different lines or transformers connected, the bus admittance matrix will only be a function of those line parameters and transformers, nothing else. No source or loads ever come or are considered while evaluating this bus admittance matrix. So what we see also observe here is that generally for a given power network, since we had a 2-bus network, so here we get a 2 cross 2 matrix. It is a symmetric matrix and is often invertible for the given network that we have. One case, by invertible I mean you can also find the corresponding impedance matrix. There are dedicated textbooks which often explain impedance matrix at length rather than focusing on admittance matrix. There is a reason behind that. The reason is 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, the computational capability was very limited, and hence finding the inverse of admittance matrix to find impedance matrix was an infeasible way because the computational capability was very, very low. And network size was still substantial. So you can imagine for a 1000-bus network, the Y bus would be a 1000 cross 1000 matrix. And among all mathematical operations, inversion or diffusion is the most computationally burdensome exercise, specifically given for matrices of large size. And that's the reason why people figured out ways of finding the bus impedance matrix right away before finding Y bus. Given the current technological advancement that we have had, inversion or inverse or factorization of a big matrix is no more a computational challenge, and hence understanding Y bus evaluation and then finding the impedance matrix if it is required makes sense. One condition under which this Y bus for the given network is no more invertible and hence Z bus will not exist is the case when YS12 becomes 0, which means that if YS12 becomes 0, these two elements or legs, they are gone, and essentially if we focus only on the network and don't focus on the sources, what we see here is that node 1 and node 2, they are connected through this series impedance, but they have no connection at all with this reference node. We all remember that when we say measurement of a voltage or a potential, it has to be measured with respect to a reference. If there is no proper connection between the reference and the point at which voltage is to be measured, how can we find V1 and V2? And that is the reason why for known current injections, node voltages become undefined. The corresponding implication is that since the reference is floating and the buses are also floating independently, there is no correlation among them, and hence finding unique voltages won't be possible, which is why the Y bus value becomes non-invertible and impedance matrix cannot be obtained. And essentially if we say Z bus, that means if Y bus is I into Y bus into V, then Z bus is Z bus into I. For a given network, if this inversion or factorization is not possible, even if we know the currents, voltage cannot be known, and that is the implication that we have here. So just to summarize, for a given n-bus network, we have two distinct terms in the admittance matrix. One we call as the diagonal term, the other we call as the off-diagonal term. Diagonal term is also has different names: self-admittance, driving point admittance. It is essentially combination of all admittances which are connected to bus I directly. Whereas the off-diagonal term I comma j, it pertains only to the series impedance which is connecting between bus I and bus j. This is a very summarized or consolidated form of how bus admittance matrix can be obtained. The next lecture, we will continue this discussion of evaluation of bus admittance matrix in presence of mutually coupled impedances and the effect of transformers on the bus admittance matrix. Thank you.